So example 3 on 451, we have 7x over 15y squared plus y over 18xy. So are those denominators the same? They are? No. So what do we have to find first? Yes. In order to find a common denominator, what do we have to find first? What's they both? Yes, that's a huge point. You do not care what's in the top. That has nothing to do with your common denominator. Is what?
So like I could just write 15y2 plus 18xy and then do it like
Just like those examples?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Okay.
So looking back up here, that's why we were pretending these were your denominators. That's exactly what you're doing now. You're finding this. That's what you're trying to do right now. So you're finding the smallest number that 15 and 18 go into. Anybody got that yet? 90. So here's why I put those two new fractions down there, because now that we know what our common denominator is, we can put that in our new fractions. 90 and 90. What's the first alphabetical letter be? X. What's the highest X we see? Plain X. So that goes in there. I haven't been crossing off. We've accounted for the 15s, the 18, and the X. Now the Y's. What's the biggest one? Y squared. Y squared. That is your common denominator. And we've already got it underneath there ready to go. So remember the very first fraction example we did with no letters. We were looking at the two denominators. That's what we got to do right here. So how did we make 15 to 90? What did we multiply by? So we put times, and we have 6. That takes care of that, gets the 15 to 90. What else is missing in the denominator? X. So we don't have an X here, right? And we need an X. So we have to multiply by it. That has to go in there. That accounts for the X. Anything else missing? We need a Y squared, right? And we have a Y squared. So that's taken care of. We don't need to do anything. So now we do the other one. 18 to get it to be 90, what do we multiply by? 5. So times 5. We have an X right there. We need an X. So that's taken care of. What's the problem though? We need a Y squared and we only have a Y. So how many do we need to multiply by? Y to the first. So 7x times 6x, 42 what? Good. And y times 5y, 5y squared. So now we do have a common denominator. Now we can add them together. Can you add those tops? Can you combine those? No. They're not like terms, but what you do in the last step is write it as one fraction. 42x squared plus 5y squared equal or over 90xy squared. That would be your final answer there because you can't actually combine. Questions before another one of those? 2 over 3xy minus 3x over 5y. So what would you do first if you had your pencil in your hand and this was your first homework problem? What should you be writing? I think I heard it, but New fraction bars. Excellent. So we have the original problem, and now we're writing that. So even if you had no clue what's going on in the world right now, you should be able to do that step. And so we're looking at 3 and 5. What's the smallest number they go into? 15. And what's the first alphabetical letter? And this biggest one, X and Y's. Would just be Y also. So 15xy is your common denominator. So 3 times what is 15? 5, so we got to take the top times 5. Any problem with the letters? No. We had an xy and we need an xy, so we're good to go there. 5 to 15, what do we have to do? What? Times 3. And what are we missing letter-wise? An x. We've got to multiply by the x. So the top of the first fraction, we would have 10 and 9x squared. You can't do anything but write them together. Why did I do what? This x? Okay, you look at this denominator, and you look at this one. What's missing letter-wise? So that's what we have to multiply. Never look at the top number. Top number does not matter when you're doing that part. The only thing you do with that top number is the last thing is multiply. But as far as what's missing or what's in common, nothing like that. Don't ever look at the top. We ready for the polynomial? All right, let's go. You want another one of those? Okay. On top of 452. Example 4 at the top of 452. How many letters do you see in that problem? 4. How many different letters? 1. If you only have one letter in a problem, what can we do? Especially if it's something like W or T. Make them X's. Sure. So we have X plus 12 over 4x minus 16. And we are subtracting x plus 4 over 2x minus 8. Now, the very last step of this problem is tricky, I will tell you that. So bear with me when we get to that. The rest of the problem, same as normal. So what should we be writing right now? New fraction bars. You have to do this twice for these problems, however, because what do you have to do to the denominators first? Factor. So you can't go straight. You can't go straight to the common denominator on these. First, you have to factor. Do we care about the tops? No. So looking at this denominator, what's the first step of factor? And is there one? Well, that was right. You just got ahead of me. She said take out a common term, and he told me a common term, which is what? 4. So we have 4, and that would leave us, if you divide the 4 out, you would have x minus 4. That's now factored. So for this denominator, what's the first step of factoring? Common term. Is there a common term? 2, and that would leave you with x minus 4. for this step, just recopy the tops, because again, we don't really care about them, but we do bring them along with us. So you just copy them. Now you make your new fraction bars for the common denominator. So do we have any numbers or letters out front? We have a 4 and a 2. So which do we take? 4. It's the smallest number that they go into. And again, what if it was a 3 and a 4? Put a 12. So you got to have a 4 in both. That accounts for those two. What else do we have under there? So we have an x minus 4, and what does that account for? Both. So you can cross both of those off. Does that have anything to do with the top? Nothing whatsoever. So, this is our common denominator that we have under here. It wasn't even that difficult to figure out what it was. We got it. Here's your original one. What's different? Nothing. So do we need to multiply the top times any? Stays x plus 12. What's different on this one? Right. This 2 is a 4, so what do we multiply by? A 2. And for that, I would put the top in parentheses, because what do you got to do? And make sure you know that's a times and not a squared. Because you did just think that that was a... What did we say we had to do here to get from 2 to 4? Times 2. So that's what you're doing here. That's a really bad way to write that. So maybe just put a 2 out there. Yeah. So we distribute the 2 in and we get 2x plus 8. And now we combine like terms. Because we already have 4. Did you have a 4? See, there's nothing different. So we have x minus 2x. That would be negative x. And 12 minus 8 plus 4 all over 4 times x minus 4. So here's that final step I was telling you about. Is that top factor? Is there anything you can do to that? But it's already factored, right? It is a factor. The bottom we already know is factored. So there's nothing we can do as far as factoring goes. So you always check, though, to see if there's something you could cross off. You could almost cross these off, right? What's the problem? So if we change this to be positive and this to be negative, if both of these signs changed, it would be the same, right? And that is what you would have to do then. So by putting a negative out front, we now have x minus 4 over 4 x minus 4. We cancel. So what's our answer? Negative 4. Negative 1. 4. Good. Very good. That one last further than yesterday. X plus 6 over 6x minus 18. Plus x minus 6 over 2x minus 6. Get started. What'd you do? Put the fraction on. Good. And we're done.
All right.
So we look at the bottom of the first one. Is there a common term there? So we take out the 6, and we're left with x minus 3. On the next one, denominator. Take out a 2, and you have x minus and again, we copy the tops. Really wouldn't matter if you even copied those as long as you add them in the next one. But it's probably a good idea to keep it all together. Once you've got that, your bottoms factored, the original problem doesn't matter anymore either. So numbers out front. Do we have any? 6 and 2, so they both go into 12. Right? So we have a 6 out front of both. And what else do we need? X minus 3, and that accounts for both of them. So that is your common denominator. Mariana,
Yes.
what's missing? So do we multiply by anything? Very good. So we have x plus 6. What's different or missing over here? Anyway. 2 is a 6, so we have to multiply times 3, and we're not treating that like an x. 3x minus 18 if we distribute the 3 and multiply that in there. X plus 3x. 4x. And 6 minus 18. And then once you get that, you always check that it's factored and you cancel anything you can. Is everything factored? We can take a 4 out, which would leave us with x minus 3 and 6 times x minus 3. So that's now back to section 1. What can we cross off? And the 4 over 6 becomes 2/3. Crazy that you started with that green fraction right there and then you ended up with 2/3. Yeah. What? X minus 1, this will be our last one, over 3x squared plus 8x plus 5. Plus x minus 1 over 12x plus 20. What we do? And we did learn something today. I'm going to get a bunch of papers with just fraction marks. We got step 1 down. So what do we do on the bottom? Is there a common term? So we grab plot 3. X plus 1 and 3x plus 5. Common term on the next one. Take a 4 out. What's left? 3x plus 5. Copy the tops. And more fraction. We got anything out front? 4. So what's the number we put up front? 4. That accounts for the 4. What's the first other factor then? Okay. What's that account for? Counts for both of them. And what's left? X plus 1 has to go in. Once again. So what's missing in the first? We had this, now we have this. A what? So we take the top times 4. And we would get 4x minus 4. What's missing on this one? X plus 1. Guess what that means? You got a FOIL. What's special about those two binomials? They're not the same. What? Conjugates. So what do we have to do? Just first and last. Man, I'm actually semi-proud of you guys today. Yeah, we don't want to go overboard. What? You go ahead and pull up. What's missing? Or what changed between that one and that one? That's what you got to multiply. And unfortunately, FOIL, only those of us that know those are conjugates know they're going to cancel, and we just have to do first and last. And first would be x squared, and last would be minus 1. And we would combine like terms. So we're going to have one big fraction. Which one of these terms would you want to start with? Dx squared. It's positive. It's the only one, so that goes out front. What next? Plus 4x. It's positive. And then we have negative 4 plus negative 1. Minus 5. So what do we need to do with that? Factors of 5 with a difference of 4. X minus 1 and x plus 5 over 4. 3x plus 5. X plus 1. Did it do us any good to factor that top? Did it provide something to cancel out? No. But you still need to factor it and check that every time. So this, either one of these could be your answer. Since you couldn't actually cross anything off, your book would probably just leave that as your answer. Either one, and this one's probably better because at least then I know you knew to try it. Oh, very good question. X minus 1 and x plus 1 are very close, right?
Yeah.
If we take a negative out of the top here, it's going to make it negative x plus 1 because that's going to become negative, that's going to become positive. So would we be able to cross off? No, because they're not exactly the same. If we took a negative out of that, you'd have negative out front, and then it would become negative x plus 1, and that's not the same as x plus 1. So always make sure if you take the negative out that it does what you want it to do. It changes the signs correctly. That reminds me of one other point. If you were to have a problem like you would have a problem like that one. I'm going to make that x minus 2. So what's the only problem there with the denominators? So your x here is positive and here it's negative. Your 2 is positive and here it's negative. So the signs need to change. If this were the problem you're working on and you know, how do we switch that around? You take a negative out front. So if you know that on your problem, you're going to leave the first one. Change this middle sign and switch it around. Instead of taking that negative out and then having a negative here and here, change your middle sign and switch it so you can get it done that way. I think that happened a couple times back in section 1, but maybe not. Maybe it's just in section 2. Any questions before we get started? I'll work through several of the homework problems with you as we go. Which is on 453 and 454. 6 through 12, even. 22 through 30, even. And 40 through 46. Even. What? It's like 13 problems. Any other questions?